So now we're actually going to get into the actual fun stuff. I kind of said that we were in the last video. I've never run this yarn test. Make sure your tests are up and running. And I'm going to fire up my file explorer over here on the left side. And we're going to get started with a basic component. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is delete app.test.js. Sayonara, we don't need you anymore. Let's go ahead and delete this guy. Because we're going to be writing our own tests and we're going to be using React Testing Library, and we're not going to be really wanting to be held down by this sort of insignificant test that's already here. The first thing we're going to do is create a new file. We're going to have a new file, and this is just simply going to be counter.js. And now counter.js is going to be a simple React component. If you've used my courses before, you know I like a React snippet library called React ES7 snippets. You can go ahead and find that in the VS Code. Type in React, this extension marketplace, and it's React ES7 Redux GraphQL snippets. This is the one I use here, and what it does is give me a snippet called RCC. Allows me to create a component with all the latest stuff, and it even takes the name of the file as the component. It's brilliant, okay? So you can see we have our very most basic component here, okay? And now what we're going to be doing, again, we want you to think in code, we want you to think in DOM output, and we don't necessarily want to head to the browser for this. What we want to do is we want to have a button, okay? We also want to have a state, and this simple state is going to simply just count up, right? It couldn't be any more simpler. We just have a basic, you click this and it counts up. Okay, so let's go ahead, and what we want to do is, again, this is going to be just bare bones here. We're going to do state is equal to, and the initial starting state point is going to be equal to, we're going to have count is equal to 0. And you can see we can have our button output as this, well, let's just do count here and do a const count is equal to, oh my God, my typing right now is equal to this dot state. Okay. So what we're going to do is have a basic button, which is just simply outputting count. Okay. And count is equal to 0. And at this point, we can go ahead and start talking about our tests. You might be thinking, why? We haven't done anything yet. Well, it's a good idea to, at this point, just get a very most basic test going before we get any sort of interaction. And as you can imagine, well, all this component is going to do is output a div with a button with the number 0. Okay, easy enough, right? Let's go ahead and talk about this. What we want to do is open up our file browser once more. I'm going to go ahead and head to that, and I'm going to create a new file, counter.test.js, so we can have a new file named counter.test.js. Now, inside of this file, you're going to notice what we're going to do is we're going to import some stuff, okay? And you're going to see instantly we already have a failing test, which is a great way to start off. The first thing we're going to need to do is import React, because, well, if we're using React, we kind of always got to import it. We're going to import React from React. Typing. Dang it. Okay. So first we're going to import React. And the next thing we're going to import is some stuff from React Testing Library. We're going to import specifically the render function from React-testing-library, okay? Let me go ahead and remove this sidebar again. So import renderer from React Testing Library, okay? And in addition to renderer, we're going to import something called cleanup. Now, cleanup, I'm getting double presses on my E's, okay? And cleanup is going to be something that unmounts all of our React trees. You can see it even, that's funny that it tells me this in VS Code. But what it does is it cleans up the DOM tree after each test. We're going to have to write some code to make it do that, though. So check it out. We now have React, render, and cleanup imported. It's great. Let's go ahead and write our first test. Let's get in here and get some test going. We're going to say test, and we're going to test what is the counter component, okay? And this test is just going to be counter as is, no props or anything like that. And the next thing we're going to have in here is a comma with an arrow function, just like we've had before in our other tests. Okay, now the cool thing about what we're going to be doing now is we're actually going to render our counter component, because so far all we've been doing is importing functions and running functions, right? And this aspect of things is where it gets a little bit more interesting because we're going to be dealing with the DOM output. Now, what React Testing Library does is allows us to run a render on a component, and it's going to spit us out something. Well, of course, we need access to this component, so let's go ahead and import counter from, and then /counter. Okay. Next thing we can do is head into our test, and we're going to create a new wrapper. So we're going to say const wrapper is going to be equal to, and then we're going to say render. Now, render is going to accept a bunch of React, okay? Now, this can accept one simple component as in counter, just like this. Notice how it's even using JSX here. It can accept a React component like this, or it can accept a whole tree of React components, as we'll see once we start wrapping things in sort of React router necessary components, or even some fake data components or stuff like that, right? So check it out. We have now a const wrapper. Now, of course, this test is passing because we're not doing anything. We're just, there's no assertions here to clean or fail or any of that stuff. So what we have here is just a simple wrapper. Now, wrapper affords us a bunch of new things. For instance, if we were to say wrapper here, we could say wrapper dot, and you can see a whole bunch of stuff in here. And some of these are really interesting, of which we're going to be using a lot of them. These queries, right? Query by. You could think of this as sort of like a way to find elements in the DOM, right? But we also have something re-render, which does a re-render, unmount, which does an unmount, and if we scroll up, you can see a whole bunch more. Get by. Again, these are going to be ways that we can find things in the DOM, and it returns a DOM node. One of the coolest things about this is that we have access to something called debug. Now, debug is a function, well, a method in this case, and we can simply run debug. Now, you'll notice something very interesting happened over here in the right side. Now, when you're debugging your tests and trying to figure out why the heck they aren't working, because trust me, when you're learning how to test, you're going to have a lot of situations where you're like, I just don't get why. So what debug does is it gives us some insight into what wrapper is actually looking at and rendering. Now, you'll see something funny here. We have a body tag. Now, the body tag is just sort of putting it in something, right? Don't worry about that too much. We have a body and a div. Now, inside of that, we have a div and a button. If you look at our counter, we have a div and a button. If we were to do something like on this div, give it a class name of hello, you'll be able to see that hello show up in our debugger. There it is, right on our div. So this is basically the first step we have to getting some visibility inside of our React test. Now, granted, this is an extremely simple component. It's fairly static. It's not doing anything. So let's go ahead and write a test for this because we want to make sure this thing works, okay? We want to make sure that this component outputs a button that has nothing in it. Now, one of the cool things about React Testing Library is that it includes some really interesting properties. For instance, if we wanted to find things in this application, we could find them via something called like a test ID. You remember when we had our wrapper dot, we did wrapper dot, and we said get all by, get by, find by, query by, all that sort of stuff, right? And it's cutting off here, but we have things like alt tag, label text, text. And if we were to, let's actually do a get by text, okay? If we were to do wrapper get by text, and we were to paste in the string 0, and we were to, let's go ahead and just log this out, right? Wrapper dot get by text 0. So we'll do console.log in here, and let's see what this gets us. It's going to be interesting. It gets us a whole bunch of stuff. And you can see, here we are. What is all this stuff? You might be confused when you see this, or you might be, well, the font size is really huge. You might actually look at this and say, I know what this is. I know exactly what this is. This is the node on the DOM, right? This is the DOM node. That's pretty sweet. We have access to the DOM node. And if you've done a lot of JavaScript, you'll already have a ton of tools in your tool belt for working with DOM nodes, right? You'll know what you can do with these things. You can do anything with them that you could if you were working in standard JavaScript. which is one of the very reasons why React Testing Library is so sweet, because other platforms like Enzyme, they want you to do everything Enzyme or React's way, right? And in this case, we get to do things the way that we're used to in the browser. So we can see wrapper, get by text, and we could actually, it's funny, this is stupid because, well, we're getting it by the text, so we know what the text content is. But if we were to say get by text dot text content and save this, it should just output 0. There we go. And if our button said hello world, it's going to output 0. So this is all pretty cool, right? And we've seen that we have wrapper get by text. Now we also have some cool things, one of which is going to be get by test ID. I'm going to talk a little bit about get by test ID in the future, but just so we have a basic test going on here, again, this is going to be a sort of redundant test. Let's actually go ahead and say we want the element to be a button. So if we just do a dot on here and you want to see what we have access to, we have some access to some stuff, right? Let's go ahead and see dot tag name when we console log this out. You can see it's a button in all caps. Okay, so this is fun. What we can do here is we can write our very first React testing assertion. We can expect that the wrapper.get by text, this whole thing that we had in our log, we can expect that the wrapper get by text 0. We can expect that the tag name to be, and then let me paste this in here, button in all caps. Save this, and our test passes. If we were to have this be like one like button, it's not going to work. Okay, so cool stuff here. What we can see exactly is, hey, we're starting to write a test, right? And we expect that the button here with the value of 0 is going to have the element tag name of button. Again, these tests are sort of dumb, and you're going to see why they're dumb, but eventually we're going to get into some really interesting tests here, and we're going to test this counter specifically. We're going to click the button, we're going to check to make sure that the value is updated, and we're going to talk about why that's significant versus things like checking the state of the button. But now we've done a lot of stuff. Okay, we've created our first test, we've rendered a React component inside of a test, we've called debug on this thing, and we've seen that we can get it outputting, and we've even written a basic assertion to check to see if the tag name of the button is in fact button. Okay, so as we get going here, this test is going to get more and more useful, and we're going to talk about writing good tests and what that means. And we're even going to get to use our cleanup that we imported in here. Okay, so as always, this is couple level up tutorials. Follow along in the next video as we expand upon these ideas and actually test this thing a little bit more.